Two guards asked Black Marine to leave his son's graduation. Then 6 SEALs silenced the room. At his son's graduation, a decorated Black Marine faced public humiliation and racist expulsion by school security. But when a shocking, classified secret about his past was unveiled by a federal agent, and 6 silent SEALs entered the room, the petty prejudice erupted into a national incident, exposing a school's deep corruption and turning one man's quiet dignity into a thunderous symbol of defiance. The auditorium hummed with the electric anticipation of 1,000 proud parents and restless teenagers, banners proclaiming Class of 2025 draped from the rafters, reflecting the stage lights. Lance Corporal Raymond Davis Retreation sat ramrod straight in the 3rd row, his shoulders broad, the immaculate dark blue of his Marine Corps dress uniform a stark contrast to the casual wear around him. He hadn't worn it since his retirement, but today was special. His son, Marcus, was graduating. The uniform was a testament to the values he'd instilled, a quiet badge of honor. He felt a surge of paternal pride as the principal began the opening remarks. A familiar murmur of parents shushing their children filling the hall. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. 2 figures, portly men in ill-fitting security uniforms, stood over him. Officer Everett, the taller of the two, had a thin, disapproving line for a mouth. Officer Abbott, shorter and perpetually scowling, clutched a clipboard like a weapon. "Sir," Everett's voice cut through the polite murmurs, not loud enough to disrupt the entire section, but sharp enough to draw glances from those nearby. "We're going to have to ask you to step outside." Raymond blinked. "Excuse me." His voice was calm, a habit from years of controlled responses under pressure. "My son is graduating today. I'm here for Marcus Davis." Abbott snorted. "We have no Raymond Davis on the guest list." His eyes swept over Raymond's uniform, lingering with an undisguised disdain. "And what exactly are you wearing? This isn't a costume party, sir." A low murmur started to ripple through the immediate rows. Parents, who moments ago were focused on the stage, now turned their heads. Raymond felt the familiar sting of unwarranted scrutiny, a prickle he'd encountered more than once since leaving the Corps, but never like this, not at his son's graduation. "This," Raymond stated, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that made a few people straighten in their seats, "is the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. I am Lance Corporal Raymond Davis. Retired. I'm a parent. Here to see my son graduate." He gestured to the rows of students already beginning to file onto the stage. "Marcus Davis. He's graduating top of his class." Everett remained unmoved, a wall of petty authority. "We don't care who you are, sir. You're not on the list." And frankly, that attire is highly inappropriate for a school function. We can't have just anyone walking in here pretending to be whatever it is you're pretending to be. The word pretending hung in the air, a deliberate insult. Raymond's jaw tightened. His hands, which had survived hostile fire and arduous training, clenched almost imperceptibly. He saw the glances from the parents around him, some curious, some disapproving of the security guard's heavy-handedness. He also saw the knowing eyes of a few older Black parents who understood the unspoken current beneath the guard's words. "There must be a mistake," Raymond said, trying to maintain a level tone. "I registered online. Marcus made sure of it." "No mistake, sir," Abbott asserted, tapping his clipboard. "Your name isn't here. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do we need to escalate this?" He made a theatrical gesture towards the auditorium doors. Escalate. The word resonated with a chilling implication. They weren't just asking him to leave, they were threatening him, in front of everyone. Raymond scanned the crowd. The principal, a stiff, balding man named Mr. Thompson, stood near the podium, oblivious or feigning ignorance. No one from the school administration stepped in. The security guards had free rein. "My son will be looking for me." Raymond insisted, his voice hardening slightly. "I'm not leaving." "Oh, you'll leave," Everett sneered, and then, inexplicably, he reached out, a meaty hand attempting to grab Raymond's arm. This was a line, a public assault. Raymond reacted on instinct, a lifetime of training kicking in. He didn't retaliate, but he moved, a subtle shift of his body, just enough to evade Everett's grasp. The sudden movement, though minimal, seemed to infuriate the guard. "Resisting, are we?" Abbott barked, fumbling for a radio on his belt. "We have a disorderly guest, uniformed individual, uninvited, resisting escort." His voice, though low, carried a triumphant ring. The murmurs grew louder. People were now openly staring. Some had pulled out phones, the blue glow of screens illuminating their faces. Raymond felt a surge of cold fury, but it was overshadowed by a crushing wave of disappointment. This was Marcus's day. His son was about to walk across that stage, and his father was being publicly humiliated, accused of impersonation, and threatened with removal, all because he chose to wear the uniform he earned and because two men saw his skin first. Then his service second, or not at all. The injustice was a bitter taste. He stood his ground, a silent sentinel of dignity amidst the rising tension, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. "Refusing to break last chance," old man Everett growled, his face contorted in a sneer. He lunged, his hand reaching for Raymond's shoulder, while Abbott, surprisingly agile, darted around to block any escape, his own hand already moving for the taser on his belt. The crowd, previously murmuring, now gasped, some even crying out as the blatant physical escalation unfolded. This wasn't just a verbal dispute anymore. Just as Everett's fingers brushed Raymond's uniform, a blur of motion erupted from the side aisle. A figure, almost appearing out of nowhere, moved with a fluid, silent efficiency that defied the crowded space. It was Agent Thorne, her dark suit practically disappearing into the shadows of the seating, before Abbott could even draw his taser. Her hand shot out, a lightning-fast movement that intercepted his wrist. There was a faint click, and the taser was no longer in Abbott's grip, but in Thorne's, held casually, pointed at the ceiling. Abbott yelped, startled. Everett, mid-lunge, stumbled back, his eyes widening as he finally registered Thorne's presence. She didn't speak a word to him. Instead, her eyes, sharp and piercing, locked onto the principal, Mr. Thompson, who was now scrambling down from the stage, a look of desperate concern replacing his earlier indifference. "Mr. Thompson," Thorne's voice, though quiet, seemed to carry an amplified weight, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the entire auditorium. Every eye was now fixed on her. "You have a security problem, a national security problem." With a flick of her wrist, the small black tablet she held pulsed with a blinding blue light. The light projected directly onto the massive screen above the stage, but instead of the school emblem, it now displayed a chillingly stark image, a stylized, almost skeletal, phantom silhouette, overlaid with a single, undeniable word in bold. Blood-red letters, "Phantom." Beneath it, a rapid-fire sequence of encrypted text flashed. Mission parameters, operational directives, critical asset warnings, before settling on a single, unredacted line, stark against the dark background. Operative designation, Lance Corporal Raymond Davis retired. Status protected asset, high-level classified. Unauthorized interference, immediate federal charges. The sheer audacity of the public reveal, the raw, unadulterated power of the image and the text, hit the audience like a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through the rows. Parents who had been recording on their phones dropped them, their faces pale. The principal, Mr. Thompson, reached Thorne, his mouth hanging open, unable to form words. "This man," Thorne declared, her voice now a steel blade, "is not a guest. He is not uninvited. He is here on a personal matter. Under direct, but unannounced, federal oversight. Your officer's attempts to remove him, to question his uniform, or to lay hands on him are not merely violations of school policy. They are active interference with a classified operation. Let me be clear, Lance Corporal Davis is not pretending to be anything. He is the living embodiment of national service, one whose true contributions remain obscured for the very safety of this nation. Everett and Abbott, caught in the sudden, glaring spotlight of their own foolishness and prejudice, seemed to shrink. Their faces, already pale, turned a sickly green. The taser, which Thorne still held, clicked ominously as she adjusted her grip. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of undeniable capability. They stood frozen, their previous bravado shattered, their petty authority now utterly eclipsed by a force they could not comprehend. The quiet reverence that swept through the auditorium wasn't just for Raymond, but for the chilling, sudden revelation that had turned a simple graduation into a stage for a top-secret declaration. The tables had not just turned, they had been atomized. The silence that followed Agent Thorne's revelation was deafening, thick with collective shock. Officer Everett and Abbott stood like statues carved from fear, their faces ashen, eyes wide and unseeing. The principal, Mr. Thompson, looked as though he might spontaneously combust from internal panic. He stammered, "Agent Thorne, I assure you, this was an oversight. We had no prior knowledge of Lance Corporal Davis's extraordinary status. My security personnel acted misguidedly." Agent Thorne turned to him, her expression a chilling mask of disdain. "Misguidedly, Mr. Thompson. Your misguidance just compromised a Tier 1 asset in a public forum. Your school's security protocols are not just deficient, they are actively hostile to decorated veterans and, frankly, to anyone who doesn't fit their narrow, prejudicial worldview. This wasn't an oversight. This was a direct result of unchecked bias." She gestured pointedly at the two trembling security guards. "These men made a choice to escalate based on a uniform and a skin color, not on a guest list, and your silence, sir, until now, speaks volumes." As she spoke, the audience, slowly recovering from the initial shock, began to stir. Murmurs turned into angry whispers. Many, now understanding the profound injustice and the sheer arrogance of the security guards, began to turn their condemnation towards Mr. Thompson and the school administration. A few brave parents, some veterans themselves, started to shout, demanding accountability. Raymond, still seated, felt a cold resolve harden within him. The immediate threat from the guards was gone, but a new, more insidious battle was brewing. He saw the calculation in Thompson's eyes. The principal was already trying to contain the damage, to protect the institution, and, inevitably, himself. Agent Thorne's voice cut through the rising clamor. "This incident is now under federal review. Officer Everett, Officer Abbott, you are both relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You will report to federal authorities for questioning. Your access to this facility is revoked. Any further attempt to interact with Mr. Davis or his family will result in immediate arrest." Two federal agents, previously unseen and blending into the crowd, now stepped forward, their presence radiating quiet authority. They flanked Everett and Abbott, who, pale and defeated, were escorted out of the auditorium through a side door, their pathetic attempts at protest dying in their throats. The school's reputation, once a source of quiet pride in the community, was now bleeding out in front of a live, phone-wielding audience. But the fight wasn't over. As the initial shock wore off, the administration's damage control began. Mr. Thompson, his face a mask of false sincerity, approached Raymond. "Mr. Davis, please accept our sincerest apologies. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. We deeply regret any distress this has caused. We would be honored if you would move to the VIP section for the remainder of the ceremony." It was a blatant attempt to smooth things over, to bury the scandal under a veneer of respectability. Raymond saw through it immediately. He stood up slowly, his eyes meeting Thompson's. "An unfortunate misunderstanding. Mr. Thompson, your men tried to forcibly remove a decorated Marine from his son's graduation. They questioned my service, mocked my uniform, and did so based on the fact that my name wasn't on a list they clearly manipulated. That's not a misunderstanding. That's targeted harassment. And your offer of a VIP section now smells of desperate damage control. A woman from the school board, Miss Albright, a stern-faced individual with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, pushed past Thompson. Mr. Davis, we understand your anger, but let's not make a spectacle of this. This is a day for the students. Perhaps you could finish this discussion discreetly after the ceremony. Her tone was condescending, a veiled threat of further complication if he didn't comply. She was already trying to downplay the incident, to frame it as Raymond's fault for making a spectacle. This was the true betrayal, the insidious attempt to rewrite history in real time. Agent Thorne stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Raymond's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. There will be no discreet discussion. Ms. Albright, this incident will be fully investigated. And the question isn't just about what happened here, but why it happened. Who gave these officers the authority to act with such impunity? What kind of environment fostered this kind of blatant discrimination? We will be looking at the school's hiring practices, its diversity initiatives, and its overall culture. Every single complaint against these officers will be reviewed. Every single internal memo regarding the security will be scrutinized. The threat was clear. The federal government was now digging into the school's systemic issues. Raymond felt the weight of the moment. His personal humiliation had become a lever, a point of entry to expose deeper rot. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity anymore. He was now the unwitting spearhead of a broader accountability probe. The pressure was immense, a silent challenge to use this public moment for something more than personal vindication. His son, Marcus, had appeared on stage, his eyes wide, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding as he looked at his father, then at Agent Thorne, then at the principal. Raymond knew he couldn't back down now. This wasn't just his fight. It was Marcus's future, and the future of every other student of color in that institution. The principal, Mr. Thompson, visibly flinched under Agent Thorne's relentless scrutiny. Ms. Albright, however, maintained her rigid composure, a tight-lipped smile plastered on her face. Agent Thorne, we appreciate your concern, but this is a school graduation. We have hundreds of families here who want to celebrate their children. This spectacle is entirely inappropriate. Perhaps Mr. Davis would prefer to settle this in private, and we can resume the ceremony. Her gaze swept over the audience, a silent plea for compliance, trying to leverage the desire for normalcy against the unfolding drama. Raymond felt the weight of her words, the subtle pressure to conform, to make himself small for the sake of the event. But then he saw Marcus, his son, standing on stage, his name about to be called. Marcus's eyes were fixed on his father, a silent plea for understanding, for justice. That look solidified Raymond's resolve. He wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. No, Raymond stated, his voice ringing with a new, quiet authority that transcended the microphone. There will be no private discussions. What happened here happened in public. And the truth, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Albright, needs to be as public as your prejudice. Before the principal or Mrs. Albright could respond, a soft, almost imperceptible sound began to emanate from the student section. It started as a rhythmic tapping, like rain on a roof, then grew. It was the students, tapping their feet on the bleachers, one by one. Then in small groups, they began to stand. Not all of them, not yet, but enough to make a statement. Then, a clear young voice cut through the tense silence. It was a girl, small and unassuming. From the front row of the graduating class, she held up her phone, pointing it directly at the principal and Miss Albright. "My name is Sarah Chen," she announced, her voice trembling, slightly but resolute. "And I recorded everything. From the moment those officers approached Mr. Davis, I have proof that they called his uniform a costume and that they used derogatory language." A ripple of shock went through the faculty section. Ms. Albright's tight smile finally cracked. Mr. Thompson looked like he'd been punched. This was unexpected. The students, often underestimated, had taken action. Another student, a lanky boy with bright red hair, stood up. "Me too," he yelled. "I got it all on my phone, the whole thing." They called him a fake Marine. Suddenly, a wave of defiance swept through the student body. Dozens, then hundreds of students stood up, their phones raised like torches in the dim auditorium. They weren't just recording, they were broadcasting. Live streams were already flooding social media. The spectacle Ms. Albright wanted to avoid was now being amplified 1,000-fold by the very people she dismissed as mere attendees. Marcus, seeing the overwhelming support from his classmates, found his voice. He walked to the edge of the stage, ignoring the principal's frantic whispers. "Dad," he called out, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew it. I knew they were wrong." The raw honesty of his son's words, the public vindication from his own generation, was more potent than any official decree. Raymond felt a surge of pride and a profound sense of vindication. It wasn't just Agent Thorne, the powerful federal agent, who was on his side. It was the youth, the future generation, who had witnessed injustice and refused to be silent. They were underestimated, dismissed as passive observers, but they were the true force multipliers in this moment. They're unified. Spontaneous act of defiance was a powerful counter-narrative to the administration's attempts at suppression. The power dynamic had shifted again. Profoundly and irreversibly, the school authorities, accustomed to controlling the narrative, were now faced with an uncontainable digital uprising. The applause, which had been tentative and scattered moments before, now swelled, a thunderous roar of approval from the stands. The students, the unexpected allies, had silenced the administrators more effectively than any federal agent could. The roar from the audience, amplified by the hundreds of students with their phones raised, was deafening. It wasn't just applause, it was an outraged crescendo, a collective demand for justice. The principal, Mr. Thompson, looked utterly overwhelmed, his face a ghastly shade of white. Ms. Albright, usually so composed, visibly trembled, her eyes darting frantically from the sea of recording devices to Agent Thorne. Then to Raymond. Her attempts to restore order were drowned out by the sheer volume of the crowd. "This is unacceptable," Ms. Albright shrieked, finally losing her composure. "You are disrupting a federal investigation. Agent Thorne and you," she pointed a trembling finger at Raymond, "are inciting a riot." Agent Thorne, however, remained calm, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, positioning herself between Raymond and the agitated school officials. Her voice, though not raised, was amplified by the public address system, a subtle act of technological dominance. "Ms. Albright, inciting a riot is a serious accusation, especially when the riot appears to be a unified stand against documented discrimination. Perhaps you should clarify who is truly responsible for this disruption." She then turned her attention to the entire auditorium, her voice now resonating with an undeniable authority. "For the record, let it be known Lance Corporal Raymond Davis Rattan is here to celebrate his son's graduation. He served this nation with distinction, in roles you cannot even begin to comprehend. His uniform is a symbol of that service, not an invitation for your discriminatory actions. Any further attempts to discredit him or these students will be met with the full force of federal law." The sheer weight of her statement, the implicit threat of legal ramifications, momentarily silenced Miss Albright and Mr. Thompson, but the crowd, now fully emboldened by the explicit federal backing, surged forward. Parents were standing in the aisles, yelling questions, demanding answers. The live streams were picking up every word, every furious shout. Just then, a side door near the stage burst open. 6 figures strode into the auditorium, their presence instantly commanding. They weren't in uniform, but their bearing, their coordinated movement, and the subtle, almost imperceptible way they scanned the room marked them instantly as something extraordinary. They were diverse, men and women, black, white, and Asian, but they moved with a singular purpose. Their eyes locked onto Raymond. These were the SEALs. The moment they entered, a hush fell over the room once more. But this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of shock, but of awe. These were clearly not ordinary men and women. They moved with a quiet intensity, a coiled power that radiated from them. They walked directly towards Raymond, their faces grim but resolute. The lead SEAL, a towering man with scars evident on his hand, stepped forward. He didn't speak to the school officials. He didn't even glance at them. He simply looked at Raymond, a profound sense of camaraderie passing between them. Then, he turned to face the entire auditorium. His voice, though deep and resonant, was laced with a controlled fury. "Lance Corporal Raymond Davis, call sign Phantom," he announced, his voice cutting through the lingering silence like a knife, "is not just a Marine. He is a brother in arms. He is one of the most decorated, unsung heroes this country has ever produced. For years, he operated in the deepest shadows, protecting lives and interests while you slept soundly in your beds." His gaze swept over the stunned faces of the school officials. To see him treated with such blatant disrespect, to hear his uniform mocked, to witness him being targeted for the color of his skin at his own son's graduation. It is an insult not just to him, but to every man and woman who has ever put their life on the line for this nation. He paused, letting his words sink in. "We are here," he continued, his voice gaining momentum, "because Raymond Davis is family. And when family is attacked, we respond. We will not stand by while good men are publicly shamed and humiliated by petty bureaucrats and biased security guards. This institution will answer for its actions. Every single individual responsible for this gross misconduct will face the consequences." The declaration, delivered with such unwavering conviction by men and women who clearly commanded immense respect, sent a shockwave through the auditorium. The principal and Ms. Albright looked utterly defeated. They were no longer dealing with a simple public relations crisis. They were facing the combined, furious might of the federal government and an elite military unit. The confrontation was explosive, broadcast live, and undeniably captured on hundreds of cameras, ensuring that every word, every defiant gesture, would reverberate far beyond the walls of the auditorium. The power had shifted decisively, crushingly, and irrevocably. The graduation ceremony resumed. A shell of its former self, Marcus Davis, his jaw set, walked across the stage to a deafening standing ovation, not just from his classmates but from parents and faculty alike. A powerful, unspoken apology. Raymond, now seated among the stoic SEALs and Agent Thorne on stage, watched his son, a quiet, resolute pride emanating from him. The stage, once a symbol of academic achievement, had become a battleground for justice. Every news camera fixed not on the graduates, but on the silent Marine who represented a much larger fight. Within hours, Officer Everett and Officer Abbott were formally charged by federal authorities with obstruction of justice and gross civil rights violations. The viral videos, raw and undeniable, showing their sneers and the phantom revelation, saturated every news channel. The story exploded, a national sensation, a potent symbol of everyday discrimination being confronted by overwhelming, unexpected force. Hashtags like #JusticeForRaymond and Honor Our Veterans and #Expose School Bias trended globally, driving public outrage to a fever pitch. Raymond, initially wanting only to witness his son's milestone, found himself thrust into the eye of a hurricane. That evening, Agent Thorne and Commander Hayes, the lead SEAL, met with him privately. "Raymond," Hayes stated, his earlier public fury replaced by a steely resolve, "this has opened a door. We can either let it close, and this becomes just another news cycle, or we can use this momentum to push for real, systemic change. This wasn't just about two prejudiced guards. This was about a culture, a system that allowed them to operate with impunity. The school board, the principal, the deliberate lack of oversight. It's all connected. Raymond, though physically and emotionally drained, felt a sharp clarity. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice steady. "We have preliminary intelligence." Agent Thorne interjected, her eyes sharp. "A pattern of similar incidents at this school? Often buried, complaints dismissed, students disciplined for speaking out, parents ignored. More damningly, we're uncovering significant financial irregularities tied to certain board members, specifically Miss Albright, and a web of contractors linked to the school's security services. The guest list fabrication might have been a small piece of a much larger, corrupt operation to control resources and maintain a biased environment for financial gain. This was the deeper corruption Raymond had suspected, a truth more insidious than simple prejudice. It wasn't just racism, it was deeply entrenched power and illicit money, carefully masked by a veneer of institutional respectability. He had been a convenient target, but now he held the leverage to tear it all down. Over the next few days, under the strategic guidance of Agent Thorne and Commander Hayes, Raymond became the national voice of accountability. He granted carefully orchestrated interviews, his demeanor calm, his message precise. He spoke not of personal revenge, but of the necessity of holding institutions accountable for fostering discriminatory environments. His quiet dignity resonated universally. If this can happen to a decorated veteran in uniform, what happens to those without such a voice? Those who are truly vulnerable? The pressure on the school board intensified exponentially. Local civil rights organizations, emboldened by the federal involvement, joined forces with national advocacy groups. Alumni and current student bodies launched massive online petitions, demanding the immediate resignation of Mr. Thompson and Miss Albright, and a complete independent audit of the school's administration and policies. Investigative journalists, spurred by the viral story, began unearthing years of suppressed complaints about racial bias, favoritism, and unfair disciplinary actions against students of color complainants that had been systematically dismissed by the very officials now under scrutiny. The public revelation of the financial irregularities, particularly Ms. Albright's alleged ties to inflated security contracts and suspicious consulting fees paid to shell companies, shifted the narrative from simple discrimination to outright corruption. The guest list incident, once a petty administrative detail, was now exposed as a symptom of a deeply entrenched, financially motivated network manipulating the school for personal gain, using prejudice as a convenient smokescreen. The public outcry swelled into an irresistible tide, demanding not just justice for Raymond, but a complete cleansing of the entire institution. The chaos of the graduation had indeed transformed into an unstoppable momentum, pushing towards a much larger, unavoidable reckoning. The public outcry became a relentless storm. Mr. Thompson, the principal, crumbled under the weight of the federal investigation and the incessant media scrutiny. He issued a tearful resignation, citing personal reasons, a pathetic attempt to salvage some dignity as the walls closed in. Ms. Albright, however, proved more resilient, clinging to her position on the school board, leveraging her connections and legal team to fight the mounting accusations of financial malfeasance and discriminatory practices. She publicly dismissed Raymond's experience as an isolated incident, blown out of proportion, a desperate narrative that fooled no one. The real showdown came during an emergency school board meeting, convened to address the deepening crisis and broadcast live nationally. The auditorium, transformed from a graduation hall into the courtroom of public opinion, was packed. News cameras lined the aisles. Agent Thorne and Commander Hayes were present, their silent vigilance a palpable force. Raymond, seated in the front row with Marcus beside him, watched Miss Albright take the podium, her face a mask of defiant indignation. "This entire situation has been a gross misrepresentation," Miss Albright declared, her voice sharp and controlled. "A single, regrettable interaction between a security guard and a parent has been exploited to undermine the integrity of this esteemed institution. We have apologized. The officers involved have been dismissed. It is time to move on. As she spoke, Agent Thorne, with a subtle nod to a technician in the back, projected new documents onto the large screen above the stage. These weren't classified military files. These were financial statements, meticulously detailed spreadsheets, and inter-office emails. The documents revealed a complex web of shell corporations, inflated invoices, and kickbacks, all channeled through a security firm partially owned by Miss Albright's brother-in-law. The firm had received millions in contracts for services often redundant or overpriced. The financial corruption was undeniably tied to the school's discriminatory security practices. As the documents showed bonuses paid to guards for efficient guest management, a thinly veiled incentive for aggressive gatekeeping, the most damning piece of evidence was an internal memo, dated months prior, from Ms. Albright to Mr. Thompson, explicitly outlining a new visitor management protocol that targeted individuals without clear prior association or recognizable community ties. The memo, coupled with another showing a significant bonus paid to Officer Everett and Abbott shortly after its implementation, painted a chilling picture of calculated, systemic prejudice implemented for financial gain. Ms. Albright's face went white. She stammered, attempting to explain away the documents, but her words were hollow. The audience, now fully understanding the depth of the corruption, erupted. Shouts of resign and fraud echoed through the hall. Then came the twist, as Miss Albright tried to regain control, struggling to deny the irrefutable evidence. Marcus Davis, Raymond's son, stood up. He walked to the stage, his gaze firm, directly at Miss Albright. "Ms. Albright," he began, his voice clear and resonant, amplified by the same public address system that had broadcast his father's humiliation. "You talk about unrecognizable community ties. Do you know what that means? It means people like my father. It means families who don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. But it also means you failed to recognize something else." He pulled out his phone. "For the past 6 months, I've been documenting every student complaint of racial profiling. Every time a parent of color was questioned more aggressively than others. Every disappearance of a complaint form. I saw what was happening. I built a secure, anonymous reporting system with my classmates. We have hundreds of testimonies, backed by time-stamped photos and videos. We knew this wasn't an isolated incident. We knew it was a pattern, and we knew it was wrong." Marcus, the quiet student, had meticulously gathered the evidence of a systemic problem, proving the administration's claims of isolated incidents to be a blatant lie. His methodical, tech-savvy defiance, conducted entirely under the radar, was the final devastating blow. It wasn't just a federal investigation or military intervention. It was the next generation, armed with digital evidence, exposing the deep-seated corruption from within. Mrs. Albright collapsed onto her chair, utterly defeated. The police, acting on a direct order from the now-present district attorney, moved in to escort her out. The public backlash was complete. Her political career, and perhaps her freedom, were over. Raymond watched his son, a profound sense of pride swelling within him. He had fought for his dignity, but Marcus, with his quiet strength and foresight, had taken that fight and elevated it, becoming a symbol of resistance for an entire generation. The story of Raymond Davis, the Phantom Marine, was no longer just about a man reclaiming his honor. It was about exposing systemic injustice and empowering the silenced, turning the chaos into a powerful beacon for change. The oppressor was outmaneuvered, not just by federal power, but by the undeniable truth, meticulously documented and publicly revealed by those they had underestimated most.